And so they started to paint this persona that your parents are your enemy. They're trying to steal your happiness and your autonomy.
Yep.
And what they're doing by telling them your parents are stealing your autonomy is that they, in fact, are pushing them away from responsibility, pushing them away from a natural progression into adulthood, and they are stealing their autonomy.
Yeah.
Because as long as I can keep you in this persona that you're too young to do this and you're too young to do that, I can control you with my advertisements, with all of my propaganda. The point is, as a young adult pastor, I understand that this is the narrative of the world. This is the way that they think. So I don't necessarily just stomp my feet and get mad at it and say, well, you should need to change. I try to insert myself, hopefully, into that world and let them know you're not too young. Even in the youth group, you're living that and teaching that you're not too young at 15 to be responsible. But people are coming in from the world thinking that they're too young at 25 to be responsible.
Yes.
And so you approach people in that vantage point, in that point of life, who have been taught, you don't need to have any sense of career, any sense of identity. In the ages of 25 to 27, you still have time. And we see this reflected in statistics. People are getting married between the ages of 31 and 35 now is like average married age now. So we have lots of these kids in church who are getting married a lot later, and there's this persona that's put upon them. Well, I was married at 21 and you're 25. And so there's an overall cultural shift.
You've been in young adult ministry for how long now?
I've been the young adult pastor. January will be 2 years.
2 years. Got it.
2 years. And I was in youth ministry in some form of leadership or capacity for 10 years. And I teach, because of that experience, I teach at Christian Life College the youth ministry seminar class. Now, because have never been a youth pastor, I take a different approach to teaching the class. I don't teach so many of the nuts and bolts because I never had the opportunity to experience those nuts and bolts. So I try to create a blended class about securing the transition from adolescence into adulthood, because there's a book that we teach. Brother Lopez taught the book, and I read through it and liked it. So I kept the book. It's called Sticky Faith, and there's a youth workers edition. And there's a statistic that the whole book is based off of, is that 60% of young people leave high school, 60%, over half. And when they leave high school, we're talking about churched young people, they forfeit, we won't say lose their faith because you can't lose your faith, but they forfeit their faith in their college years. And now the immediate reaction might be, well, youth is populated by a large amount of people who are forced to be there. Their parents are forcing them to be there. They don't want to be there.
That's a good point.
And by the time they get to college, it's just a sense of liberty. It's the pent up, shaken up, carbonated bottle effect. Okay, now I get to cut loose. But that statistic goes on to say, out of that 60% that had fallen away, out of that 60% that had fallen away, 80% of that 60% intended to keep their faith.
Oh, yeah. So
they wanted to keep their faith, but they didn't. So enter young adult ministry.
Come in, bro. Come in. Yeah, we started on this thing.
Yeah. So enter young adult ministry. And that's why I believe, so like the point of this session today, I believe is why young adult ministry. Why should you care?
Right.
Why is it a big deal?
Yeah.
Why is it effective? And then I think we'll eventually get into why we believe it's underutilized.
Yeah.
I think people take the wrong approach.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the notes that you send to us is that we overcompensate for connectivity. This group, we overcompensate more than anything and readjust our gospel approaches because we're so hungry to connect with them,
right,
that we actually diminish how we do church in every other strata, which is, and we can get to that in a moment, but the value of young adult ministry, it's to create a net to keep all of the young people. And Pastor Chris and I have always said since day one, and this is what he had with Pastor Micah, my predecessor, is it is imperative that the youth pastor and the young adult pastor have a good relationship, have a good connection, because Chris takes such, I was under his leadership for a year and a half. He takes such intensive care over these kids, him and his entire staff, and their parents as well, to pray with them, pray them through, get them up to youth camp. They do all of these things and wear themselves out to make sure that these kids can make it through high school without forfeiting their faith.
Yeah.
And then it's like passing your baby off.
Right.
Okay, will you please take care of them now?
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a thriving young adult ministry, now CLC is an animal of its own, because thanks to the foreknowledge of, and we can maybe get into the history of CLCs, because I think that is important, watching the progression. But, because of the vision of Eli Lopez, we have a thriving young adult ministry. But I have seen it to be the case that our movement as a whole has done well in identifying the need for youth ministry as a whole. It would be very rare for you to go to a church of any size of 100 or more and them not have a youth ministry.
Yeah.
That would be very rare.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not rare to go to a church of 500 or 1,000 and them not have a young adult ministry.
Yeah.
Or at least a young adult ministry that's geared in a way that I would deem as effective.
Yeah.
Or appropriate, rather.
Right.
And so there's so many Pastor Chris's out there who are praying and fasting and toiling and sweating to love these kids and to take care of them and to contextualize the gospel in their setting. And then they hit this arbitrary mark of 18, where somehow they lose significance and value in the church for some reason, and they no longer are targeted in many dimensions. It's like, okay, well, now you're an adult, you're just like the rest of us, and it's this theoretical cliff.
Yeah.
And
push them out to the ocean to swim on their own, to do their own thing.
Yeah, and it's many of them just aren't ready, and there's good reason for that. I think we'll really get. I don't want to just start talking about it,
right.
Because if I start talking about it, I'm not going to stop talking for about an hour, because this is my heartbeat of where we misdiagnose this so much.
Yeah.
Well, you're 18, you should be an adult already. Well, who said 18 was the marker for adulthood anyways, besides the U.S. law? Right? Like in the biblical times, it was 13, right? Yeah. What is the line? And I think it's more important to focus on maturity of the individual rather than age benchmarks.
That's the truth.
Because we focus too much on age benchmarks. Well, if you're not married by this age, if you're not doing this by this age, then you're somehow some type of failure. And we put people so much into a herd mentality that we don't ever assess the life of the individual.
Yeah.
But even the group, people are getting married later. People are getting into their careers and finishing college much later. All these things delay some things. Again, I'm kind of holding back because I know we're in the introduction phase, but they hold back things that are imperative for that next stage of life. Marriage and all these types of things, and children that we want them to be at. And so if you don't have a buffer zone or a ministry that's able to contextualize where they're living, you're missing so many people. And that's where we start to get the statistic of 60% of young kids that leave their youth groups backslide in the college years. And 80% of those wanted to keep their faith. And so Chris and I are like vehement that won't be us.
Yeah, gotta change it. Yeah.
And some of them are going to, because that's just
Wide is the way.
Wide is the way.
Wide is
they
the way.
were in that group
Right.
that were bottled up and wanted their freedom and to that degree. But I don't ever want it to be said that 8 out of 10 of the 60 that do fall away wanted to keep their faith. And they just didn't have the tools to do it.
That's good.
So we try to do that in Lifeline, and I hope we might be able to say something on the podcast today. And I'm always talking to Bible college students like, hey, if you don't have a position open at your church, like, do you have, we call it hyphen. Neither of us like that word, but it's the contextual word that we use. But do you have a hyphen ministry at your church? They say no. Perfect. Go start one.
Right. If I can throw this your way, Chris, you being a youth pastor for a number of years now, what are some of the tendencies that you have seen for the reasons why many times youth do not continue in their faith? And do you see that perhaps the apostolic movement might be misdiagnosing the reasons why, or the influences that come on young adults when they turn 18, or when when they turn 18, they're passed along to the next ministry, But what are your thoughts on that? What have you seen?
Well, there's a couple things that you have to look at, So you have the group that was born and raised in the church. Think of the group that was saved at some point in their life. Maybe mom and dad came in when they were in middle school or came in high school. And so here, I pastor both, you know what I mean? And obviously those grow up and go into Pastor Morgan's area, but I pastor both. I pastor the PK kids, we could say.
Yeah.
For those maybe listeners unfamiliar, the pastor's kids.
Mm-hmm.
But basically the kids have been, the pastor's kid, but also the kids that have been raised in the pew. You know what I mean? Like, families out there, 3rd or 4th generation Pentecostal. Then I have kids that literally got saved like 6 months ago. You know what I mean? So there's a different range. So off the bat, we kind of use this term like the kids that bought in, that Jesus Christ wasn't simply a religion, but it became a personal relationship and experience. Like something changed, God changed something in them, and they allowed God to change in them. And so the challenge with kids that grow up in the church, and I believe across any denomination really, the ones that have been in it, they're so familiar, they're so comfortable, they know the cues, they know when to, how to act, how to flow. And so there never came a point of maybe extreme vulnerability that allowed God to come in and do what he does to someone who opens themselves up, And there are students now and, that grew up in the pew that did get their life and the experience, Brother Morgan's an example of that, that he grew up in the pew, but he fell in love with Jesus and he gave his life to Jesus. And he said, let's do this. I'm from the other perspective where I got saved when I was 20. I was even a youth, Wow. And so, kind of I guess between us, talk about the young adult ministry, youth ministry, we have really like a really incredible dynamic because there's way two different like schools of thoughts. Okay.
That's true.
And if I could say respectfully, Pastor Morgan will admit, his parents at one point had split. My parents stayed together. Yeah. You know what I mean? So here we are. We have these two different, like, really interesting perspectives of, like, being raised in the church, not raised in the church. Yeah. But some things are more traditional. Some things were just different, And look at what happened, God saved my soul. God saved his soul. I feel the Holy Ghost kind of saying on this. You know what I mean? Like, and so, what I see is that the students that, when I say buy in, is that they striving for a personal connection outside of the worship setting, outside of the service. Okay.
Something that's more fundamental to who they are.
I mean, truly, they make it part of who they are. I think the biggest thing is that, that Jesus Christ actually accepts them. Many youth deal with rejection. They feel that there's a bar set so high, so impossible to reach. Why even try? Or it's for the select few, or it's for the preacher, it's for that super spiritual kid. Well, I got a couple super spiritual kids that I'm dealing with their sin problem as well. So there's also this misconception of like even what it is to be a Christian, to be a follower and disciple of Jesus Christ. So I see so many kids fall by the wayside because they at some point never really grasp the fundamentals of even what it is to be a disciple of Jesus Christ and what the mercy and the blood does. And so, I'm trying to remember all the questions that you said to me, but what I'm trying to get to is the fact that when kids who don't establish like their faith early on, even the kids who do, see, here's the thing, like, I wish I could say like there's like a for sure method or system that guarantees that when a student who's a youth comes in and they follow these fundamental steps, they're going to be successful at the end. Yeah. they're going to make those choices.
Mm.
But I've seen youth that maybe fell away right after high school.
Yeah.
A couple years later, came back stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Came back stronger than ever. But I could look at those, but something had to happen in them or something got in them. You know what I mean? Where it got into them that they were making a decision where I'm in this for life, not in this for the show. And so
usually that requires an existential crisis, a crisis of the self, a crisis of you questioning who you are, where you fit in the world. And I think a lot of churched individuals don't let themselves get to that, or don't have the opportunity to get to that deeper reason. Why am I here? Why do I do what I do?
Yeah.
So when they encounter problems in this world, because they have no crisis experience with God, it's not good enough to live in this world having to be bombarded with all kinds of things in this world, sin, temptations, and not have a more fundamental reason to live for God, to serve God, you know.
I had a student, is a good example. I had a student that they were basically at the end of their time. They were about to graduate, and this student had, at the latter part of his years, had begun to do very well. And they were on, pretty good trajectory, going forward and live for God. And they made the decision to continue. Anyway, there was a crisis. Something happened. They made a big mistake. And they came clean to it, the individual, the parent met with me. And it was one of those moments where, hey, I this is what's up.
Yeah.
So this person had been involved in various areas of ministry. And it was one of those moments where, like, well, by the book it says, the Bible, but by some secret book, I gotta strip you of everything.
Right.
You gotta sit down. Okay. Looking at the history of this individual, and not compromising, but looking, I said, I was really praying for God for wisdom. God's wisdom said, let's have mercy in this. There's a mistake made, but they're truly genuinely repentant about this.
Yeah.
And so I call, and they were, whatever you decide to do, we'll follow you. So we will back you up, the parents as well. And so I gave a call, and this situation, I said, hey, talked a little bit. I said, God's really clear what He wants on this. He's going to extend His mercy on this. And that one thing completely cemented this person, because they had a situation where they're at the mercy of God.
Yeah.
Right. And God's mercy was extended. They had and I would say, out of the many experiences that I know this young person had, that was probably one of the greatest, where they saw it in action.
Yeah.
Because they knew,
right,
I'm guilty.
Yeah.
They knew, you have every right to completely put me down or correct me. There's a place for rebuke. We see that. And as a leader, I was in every right to do so. But His mercy.
Yeah.
But His grace. And in this situation, this individual, it was more than just what happened. Stupid teenage thing.
Yeah.
It was, in this situation, in that moment, was going to be, I believe, his determining factor, to the extent that later on, this individual, we had talked, and he had said to me, Pastor Chris, like, not in an ugly way, but it's a real way. So I feel if I would have, I feel like I would have been it, because I that's it. I failed too many times.
Yeah.
Now they had an experience. What I mean? They had where the gospel becomes real.
Right.
And we talk about, I talk about this vulnerability with young people, especially once you're raised in the church, they won't become vulnerable.
Yeah.
They won't become open to God.
Right.
Allow God to appear. So, again, I am talking about what concretes individuals.
Yeah.
Part of that
Yeah.
is not just the faithfulness, not just, I was there, I showed up, but that they had they experienced the mercy and the love and the healing, the forgiveness of God. And they said, I can't deny it. And so among many things, but that is, something I see the ones who make it, who continue on, that I see now in the young adult ministry, even being used.
Right.
The young adult ministry, I can think of several individuals that me working with them as a youth, and at times, I can think of several right now. I'm thinking of a couple right now that like they let God in. And there was those hard, vulnerable conversations, even ones of like, hey, apologizing to me and my wife for having some being very rude and off year, just like, I'm sorry for the way I acted. Something got a hold of them. Yeah. And there was love, there's forgiveness and restoration there. Yeah. And now I see these individuals thriving. They experience the gospel, they experience the love and truth of Jesus Christ, And so, again, we can get deeper into this. I know we're gonna talk more stuff, but again, them having that experience, of the gospel, is an indicator that they're gonna stick with it, even maybe not right after. Yeah. But the long-term game, is that they'll make a life for God. And again, I've seen people a couple years making some funny decisions, but there was enough in them to know that they were never rejected. They were going to come home. And again, Pastor Morgan said some kind words about the youth ministry. Well, there was a season where, with all love and respect, I'm like, man, my kids are leaving. Yeah. Do they have a solid place to land? Because there were some transition times going on, things were different, but supporting young adult ministry, which is on the rise, which is seeing the need of it, not just a place where, basically adult youth don't want to grow up anymore. No, it's much more than that. It's much more than that. But seeing that they have a solid place to land, I know me personally here in our little bubble, I'm like, you're gonna have to intentionally like run away. You're gonna have to like go change your zip code even. Yeah. You have to change your name, because I know Pastor Morgan and his team, they're gonna hunt you down. You know what I mean? Like, they're gonna hunt you down. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what it is. The fact that, like, as the church, we have to be able to. There is no excuse for you not to thrive. Right. And not that we feel better at night, but it's the fact that we are doing absolute best to make sure they have somewhere to land where they get a true experience of Jesus Christ. Right. Like that. And after that. Yeah. I believe if Brother Morgan go home with them, he would. Yeah. He would. He'd be like, all right, I'll put you to bed. Yeah. Live right. His little blankie. Yeah. I'll back in the morning for prayer. Yeah.
Got to get him.
Well, anyway, just, but it's just, again, they have to have a great place to land. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off there.
No, it answers a broader question that I think is described all throughout the church, is this concept of maybe you think of a better word, sub-ministries within the church. We don't see this in the book of Acts. We don't see children's ministry or youth ministry or young adult ministry or elders ministry. Maybe, Acts 6, the ministry of the widows, but for the most part, we don't, right? And so we understand that the gospel reaches all people in all times and all places. And so I bring this up to my classes, like, what is the purpose of a missionary? A missionary, we generally believe, is someone that goes to an unreached group of people and preaches the gospel to them. Well, what is the first job of a missionary? And Josh, you teach a lot of the missionary classes. At least what I heard Brother Rash say. Now, different people might have different opinions. What is the first thing that a missionary should do when they go overseas? Generally, what I've heard is learn to speak their language, right? Learn to speak the people's language, because you're only going to be limited in effectiveness through a translator in a long scope of things. I'm not speaking, in the short-term mission trips, but I'm speaking if you're going to reside in India or Indonesia or Holland, Brother Rash as an example, you need to learn to speak that person's language. Well, even within languages, we have dialects. Parts of the Philippines, there's so many different dialects. In parts of India, there's so many different dialects. We've even learned in the United States, I don't know if we'd go as far as to say it's a dialect, but there's certain types of English. People in the inner city are going to speak much differently than people maybe on an academic campus. Yeah. And certain individuals can go to an academic campus, and it would be an equivalent
as if they were speaking a different language,
Yeah, very
or at
true.
least a
The
different
jargon,
dialect.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to reach the people, I need to reach them in their own language.
Right.
And this is where sub-ministries ultimately develop. And so it's most
good.
demonstrative. It's most demonstrative in children's ministry, and it gets somewhat progressively, I don't want to say diluted, but it progressively becomes more uniform as you get older.
Mhm.
But in children's ministry, I mean, you're telling the stories in their most basic, simplistic forms.
Mhm.
You leave out details, you know. I always found it comical that one of, some of the most famous children's stories are actually some of the most bloody and graphic, And
Yeah.
you think of Noah and the ark.
Yeah.
You mean the day that all the people in the world drowned to death and struggled and suffocated underwater?
Oh my God.
And David and Goliath, you notice we always remove
Yeah.
the beheading of Goliath
Right.
when telling the story of David and Goliath.
Well, my
David
favorite
hit him with the stone.
And then
That's it.
That's it. And then
Well,
his eyes
victorious.
his eyes have the X and the little
Yeah, I
swirl
know,
over
right.
his
I
head.
think we got the same children's book, I mean, Daniel Lyon's dead.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
That
I
is
have a
true.
kid's book, and he went and he got thrown in the den, and then he got up, and everything was okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's not talk about how the fact that everybody who accused him,
Right, got
them and
thrown
their
into-
families,
Yeah.
were then thrown in the lion's den and completely murdered by these.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Well,
it's-
Yes.
but it's appropriate. Is the
I add
point.
those.
Yeah, it
I add
is.
those parts when I read to my kids.
Yeah.
And I say, oh, well, then this is what the King James says about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
So-
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, it's appropriate in some regards because both Jesus says, if I
Yes.
speak to you in earthly things and you do not understand,
Yeah.
how could you understand of heavenly things?
Yeah.
And then Paul says, I'm speaking to you as to children, not as to mature. The writer of Hebrews says, I'm still writing you of milk. I wish I could write of you of bread and meat. And so this understanding of delivering and preparing and contextualizing the message of the gospel within the language of the individual is paramount.
Yes.
Thus, sub-ministries develop. And so your children's ministry is where it's most demonstrative, but then it progresses into youth ministry.
Mhm.
And youth ministry, the language is much different. You're not afraid to tell them the gory details,
Right.
yet there are going to be particular themes you're going to highlight maybe a little bit more in a main service, and there'll be certain themes in a main service and vice versa. And so historically, we've had this blending
Yeah.
after you hit your 18-year-old benchmark, which again, I want to overemphasize, is an arbitrary benchmark. Nobody says anybody has to be in an adult mindset at 18. They could be at 16. They could be at 15. They could be at 19. It is an arbitrary number. And so there'll be certain people who are not ready to progress, and they still need that buffering zone and that contextualization of the gospel. And in a previous podcast, which is so important to me as far as how I position myself in ministry, is we did one on the post-Christian secular society, and that's in the archives. But we're now speaking to a people whom, especially the young adult age, is an unchurched generation.
Mhm.
And so what are we doing by creating sub-ministries? We're creating community of people of similar mindsets, backgrounds, and context. We're taking the gospel and contextualizing it, and we're also giving them an opportunity to get plugged in and to get involved in ministry within their own context. So this is why we create sub-ministries, where a lot of people fail, and this is maybe where we can get into the subject,
Mhm.
is they feel that when someone leaves youth ministry, they should be a full-fledged adult. No, you need to come into the main service. You should think like an adult. You should act like an adult. What constitutes adulthood?
Yeah.
And again, it's not age. Adulthood technically is defined as someone who is responsible for their own decisions, meaning they have the ability to sign on the dotted line and make decisions for their lives. Well, legally they have that, but for the most part, if somebody lives at home, they still need the consent of their parents. And secondly, is financial independence, okay? And historically in the United States, people reached both of these benchmarks at the ages closer to 18, 19, and 20. But in the United States, people now do not become financially independent, where they're paying their own bills, making all the decisions that constitute the direction of their life, autonomous from their guardians or their parents, until they are at the age of 25 to 27. People are not moving out of home. They're still on their parents' car insurance. They're either fully dependent or partially dependent. Even if they're at school in a dorm room, their parents are paying their car bills. They're still dependent upon their parents. Now, there's a very important reason for that. That's not, like Chris said, laziness solely. Are people lazy? People have always been lazy. That's why in the Apostle Paul's time, just because they were for the first century didn't mean there weren't lazy people. He said if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. They're having problems with lazy people, right? And so it doesn't mean that lazy people don't exist. They always have and they always will. But there's this dynamic in society where the cost of university has gone up. I'm sure you know the numbers much better than I do. But to get a college degree 20 years ago was probably closer to $40,000 maybe every, for an associate's degree. UOP now is what?
$40 a year.
Is it a year? I thought it was a semester. I thought it was like
it could be.
Because we have a friend who went to UOP who I know is in 6 figures of debt.
Yeah,
from UOP going there 4 years.
100,000.
And so, I mean, and he's paid and paid.
Yeah.
And so there's this concept of that. There's a concept of just the cost of living that is actually delaying or prolonging the adolescent stage.
Yeah.
And so what I have come to know is that there's developmental stages in the brain throughout life. From 0 to 1, I believe, is the attachment phase, when you come to a sense of attachment between your parents. And the stage 1 to 3 is a sense of security. Am I secure? 3 to 4 or 3 to 7 is where you start to hone your skills. This is when you learn to talk, read, write, bounce a ball. This is where skill making is a very important part. And then there's the pre-adolescent age where you start to learn to function in a society. You're not with your parents all the time. You're starting to develop a sense of autonomy and bravery for the first time. The youth stage is a stage where you come to a sense of identity, and you were hitting on this earlier. Who am I, and what do I do? And those are the sense of identity. Once you come to those senses of identity, the next stage in life is how secure are my relationships. Yeah. This is when you go, when your youth, they have the amazing ability to have 50 friends at one time. They could text 50 different people. They can hang out with 50 different people, and they're friends with every single one of them. This is the stage where you literally have 10 best friends. Yeah. That's my best friend. That's my best friend. That's my best friend. As you get older and you start to see the value of relationships and how much time it takes to invest into those relationships, you start to say, man, I cannot maintain 50 friendships, and definitely not 10 genuine best friendships. Yeah. So you start to shave. No longer are you looking for friendships, because when you're in that adolescent phase, you're looking for the friends in whom you have the most fun with, who give you the most enjoyability. But when you get older, you start to think of friendships that are the most secure, and you start wheedling and wheedling and wheedling. And ultimately, this season of life is when you start genuinely looking for a spouse and start looking to have children, because you're thinking about your legacy. But you have to first come to an identity of self and where you fit before that becomes a natural process. Now, in church, it all gets mixed up, right? Because, we practice abstinence, which is a biblical doctrine. So sometimes people's motivation for marriage isn't about connection, but it's about genuinely, we're being real. It's about purity, right? And so it gets all mixed up, and maybe we can parse it a little bit later. But why do we have people in their 20s, mid-20s? We had a conversation at lunch about this today. People in their mid-20s using the phrase, I'm just not ready to get married. Right. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean financially. Yeah. Because you can go down to Amazon and work 60 hours. They'll give you the hours, and you'll have more than enough money to pay for an apartment and get married. It's no problem. You're not talking about that. You're saying, I have not come to an identity of self. I don't know who I am yet. I don't know where I fit as well. I don't know in Bible college context. I don't know if I'm going to be a pastor, evangelist. I might get an internship that comes up. I need autonomy of self because I'm still in the exploration phase of my life. Yeah. So I have this concept of delayed adolescence. So people aren't locking into that adulthood phase at 18, 19, and 20 like they were several years ago. People at 18 knew what they wanted to be. They wanted to be a doctor, and they started to pursue it the next year. People go to Delta for 5 years.
Yeah.
Or junior college, rather.
Yeah.
5 years before they ever even think about.
Yeah.
Or they go get a business degree, having no idea what that means. You know,
exactly.
I'm going to get a communications degree. I don't know what that means. But like, so just because they're even in a degree program doesn't mean they've come to an identity of self. I'm maybe on the farther loose side of that, where I don't critique that. I adjust to that because I don't think it's an individual problem. I think that that's a cultural dynamic. Like I said, who says someone has to be an adult at 18, right? And I don't mean that like they are adults. Who says they have to be autonomous? I don't know. Someone said that. My job is not to work on the legal ramifications, but to work on spiritual maturity. Bring people to those places of the Bible talks about leaving your father and mother and finding a wife. The Bible talks about being responsible, taking care of your family, taking care of your bills. So rather putting an arbitrary age on that, I tried to adjust to that person as an individual and say, okay, where are you at in life? Rather me just judging you and say, well, you're just a loser. You're not married at 25.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's connect on a personal level and find out, why are you delayed in your identity of self? Why are you delayed in these? What types of things have come into your life that have hindered you in finding where you fit in the body of Christ? And I've learned so often when we can answer those questions, the natural maturity processes of, okay, now I'm ready to get married, and now I'm ready to enter ministry, and now I'm ready to bear children. But if you just write a blanket, and this is why so many people don't have, and I'll pass it to Josh after this, because he's got so much good to say about this. That's why I feel like so many people don't start young adult ministries, because there's almost like a gripe, like, well, you shouldn't need this. You shouldn't need this. Well, I feel like they do.
Yeah.
And with, like, I don't get perturbed by it, but I still see that the goal has not changed.
Yeah.
And that's spiritual maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And spiritual maturity will produce natural maturity.
Yeah.
It's just a natural byproduct.
I have a bigger problem with, I think, Christians pointing fingers at young adults than people who are in the world. Because the world is part of this rhythm that, of course, they would be corrupt, right? In the world, leaving God out of it, right? We have a system, and you've brought this up many times, Pastor Morgan, that the world has created a system that has created a market for prolonging adolescence. It's starting from teenage years. So there's this whole marketing system that is built upon extending the age in which young people do not make choices, but instead of saving for their future, they buy those new shoes. They buy that new phone. They go and they make these decisions, and there's a whole market in the world for that. Certainly has influenced the church. However, I think the reasons why it happens in the world shouldn't be the same reasons, and are not the same reasons why that ends up influencing the church. Because we should know better. We're actually critiquing ourselves when we say, why aren't young apostolics stepping into ministry? Okay, well, who raised them?
Right. It's so important, man.
Who was their parents?
So important.
Who were their youth pastors? Huh? Why are you complaining about young adults who are apostolic, who are not stepping into ministry? They're not growing up. Who led them? Right? People do not disciple themselves.
Right.
They need to be discipled, especially in this day and age, because we don't have a moral world that is giving us a baseline of maturity. We don't have a moral world that is saying to youth anymore, you're going to get married early, so you got to start learning responsibility, start getting a job when you're 15, when you're 16, you start learning how to pay your own bills. Why? You're going to have to, that kind of social pressure sped the adult development, the maturity development within youth a lot more in the past, right? And now that the world is not giving the church a baseline of that kind of development,
good.
Now the church has to step in and learn how to do that with the gospel. Because on top of society breaking down in those areas, we have families or youth that never grew up with a father and never grew up with a mother didn't even have the chance to grow up with a healthy sense of identity, a healthy sense of, this is who I am, this is what I'm part of, I am growing up. When I grow up, I'm going to have a support system behind me, a mother and a father who loves me and is going to help me launch off and make decisions. Instead, we have this, large amounts of young people who are in the foster care system, and young people who hate their parents, and even young people who are influenced by the world that is naturally sowing within their hearts and their minds disdain for their parents, disdain and the view of their parents as oppressors. That is a great evil that is occurring, and these young people will not raise themselves. One thing that Brother Chris did that I absolutely loved, and is exactly the kind of thing that we need. You did during the summer. What is it called? The summer of
this School of Sacrifice.
School of Sacrifice, bro. Describe what you did. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's phenomenal, and it helps them build their identity. If you want to talk about, because I don't know all the details. I know you put them to work.
Yeah. But so we've been I don't want to say noticing, but like I've held the stance for a long time that young people, and again, the room of young people, teenagers, we'll say between the ages of 10 to 18, okay, those adolescent years, we look at, they hunger and desire responsibility, structure, consistency, that going, like you said, that a mother and a father being there provides, even if the parents don't work out and the parents get married, there's sometimes a father's structure, the father's in the figure, or in the picture, or the mother's in the figure, like some type of base, even grandparents that are there, you know what I mean? So that would provide, but things are changing. So we notice that there's such a hunger and desire to be put to work, to be given responsibilities. So, but we talked about society has took that away from them. You know what I mean? Like, well, it's not your fault. It's things are okay. So there's mindsets going on, the fact that like, well, I can make these mistakes, but the consequences are minimum. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm not afraid anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Like, and so going back to the summer, what we began to do, I did something, it's been something I've been wanting to do for a couple of years, called School of Sacrifice, where basically it was that we're going to serve the church, serve the community, and then, serve the youth. And so we met for 3 days a week, and we, Mondays, we had Bible studies, and we did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we did Bible studies, but also we served on the church campus, and we did weekly outreaches out to the community, we're here on campus doing work, we're cleaning the high school, the college, like we're putting to work. And so during that season, that time, God dealt with me, and kind of still in that season of being disciples and being servants, that we can't live in a constant place of receive. We come to serve and to give and not pour. And so we basically put these kids to work, blood, sweat, and tears. It wasn't very glamorous. I barely gave them water, so like they, but they came and they served 20, 30 young people coming out.
That's awesome.
From that time, we've seen the last 2 years, I could probably count at least 20 youth right now that I would completely trust to run the youth group. Wow. I would completely trust to run.
And they're all under 18.
All under 18.
Teenagers.
All teenagers.
That's awesome. They can rise to the occasion, bro.
So here's what's happening now, talking about, young people and leadership and growing up, you know what I mean? There's I feel a dynamic changing, at least maybe for our little world, because we've been challenging these kids. Right. We've been say, okay, sink or swim. Yeah. Fail or succeed. Yep. And so it's come to a point here at our church where we're gearing up to do like a ministry fair. People inquire about our ministries. Well, I've been in this kind of like mental conundrum, or just like this I'm like, I don't know what to do, because I am actually looking towards my young people to become the next leaders of the youth, because they are not just like, let's keep them busy, but they have shown themselves
Yeah.
to be leaders. They have
Yeah.
shown themselves to be responsible and consistent. Still knuckleheads, you know what I mean?
Well, of course,
But
they're young.
that's the part where we
Yeah.
as like overseers, as
Right.
leaders and pastors, kind of guide that
You're
and
guiding
structure that.
guardrails.
But what we did was basically, I guess, old school, went back to some biblical principles
Yeah.
of being responsible,
Yeah.
of being trusted.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge thing too. Is
Yeah.
like, it's no longer, let me trust you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We talk about, back in the 1940s or 50s, where kids were driving, the tractors and the trucks on the farm. Actually in rural America, it's like that all the time. These kids are operating heavy machinery.
Yeah.
They're out there like cutting down trees with chainsaws. You know what I mean?
They can do it.
What they're given responsibility. I
Yeah.
think what is happening is levels of society,
Yeah.
especially liberal society, is taking away responsibility,
Yes.
Right.
taking away out of their hands.
Oh, it's not, you're too young. It's not your time.
No,
right?
no.
But you're taking away the opportunity for them to learn. To give someone opportunity is to tell them, I trust you, like what you were saying. You trust them, and they feel valued in saying, somebody trusts me with this.
They absolutely do. And I really woke up in the last couple of years, and I, again, this is not like a bromance here, but one thing I've looked at Brother Morgan. Everybody who wants to serve, he'll find them a job. Like there's like people at 30, like there's like 30 different jobs. Like it's like
You just make stuff up.
you just make stuff up. You know what I mean? I look over, it's like it's like all right, you're section 1 leader. I mean, you're section 2, like you know what I mean? You give, and what happens is that these people, young adults, that they come up and they're like, I want to be given responsibility. I just kind of like Morgan, you brought it up, which, in preparation for this talk, looking at, the brain development actually in young people, that, puberty beginning around 10 or actually younger now, which we won't talk about GMO foods and all that, but we see actually kids hitting puberty younger, even as young as 6 hitting puberty in some areas,
but
our
discipleship isn't getting younger.
Well, I mean, I get, young people can handle a lot.
Yeah, they can.
They handle a lot. We actually don't split up our young people, junior high and high school. They're all together because they're all kind of getting the same. We do something split up, but I remember when I was in 6th grade.
Yeah, bro.
You know what I mean?
You're already dealing with stuff.
So
bro. Seeing stuff.
Here we're talking about the development of the brain, and a lot of times like parents have issue with youth. Oh, my kids, he's so wild, so rambunctious. Like all they do is care about their friends. Well, actually, the brain is at a place in development, without getting into all the nitty gritty, terminology, where it seeks reward. It seeks reward. It's willing to take risk for the reward of the satisfaction of their peers. So I think kind of plays into what you're saying about how as they get older, they care less about the group of 50 friends, and they care more about the 10 good friends, or
2 or 3.
All I have is in this room.
I want secure connections rather than the approval of the crowd.
And that goes into not action to development. It's a fact that they get older, they realize the reality that the way that dopamine is distributed changes over time as you get older. So it's not the same thing anymore. Now, part of my personal thought as far as, prolonged adolescence is actually with social media, with technology, because with the increase and yes, pornography as well, is that when you're scrolling is basically, we're all dope heads. We're all looking for dopamine. You're looking through the IG, you know what I mean? You're looking, maybe out of 50 things you scroll, 2 things you like. Okay, that's cool, right? You keep looking for something to give you that little hit. Little hit. Well, kind of that. So it used to be that was how it was when you were younger. Just like, let me just be active, let me go. I'm my friends. Right. But so that was supposed to kind of die down when you became older. You know what I mean? As your brain begins to change.
Very good.
But now, since media
do it in your room, you can do it in wherever you want.
Exactly. So since it's not like media and advertisement and marketing is geared towards the younger group.
Yeah.
The adults are getting the same stimulation that the teenagers are.
Wow.
And so there's things in the brain that still want that dopamine, which is prolonging adolescence because they crave the same thing a 16-year-old kid wants. Acceptance.
Fire right there.
They want that acceptance of all these people. Social media.
Yes.
50,000 followers, 50 friends.
You're absolutely 30, 40, 50-year-olds posting like they're 15 years old.
I mean, spending hundreds upon hundreds of dollars on a pair of,
Social media has changed the entire life.
I think a part of, society also, maybe, I don't know if the word's enabling, right? Taken away. Is that it? Like, I'm with two scholars here. You know what I mean? So, but basically, with society, like, taking away the responsibility, like, don't worry about it.
Right.
And there's some socioeconomic reasons there. Like you said, college is crazy expensive. That's why the rise of, like, trades and specialties is on the rise.
And just cost of living.
Cost of living. You know what I mean?
Even
right
for
now.
my young married couples, like, we are seeing a mass exodus of young married couples. Not for anything that has to do with the church or anything. They're involved. They're plugged in. Their best friends are here, but purely because of economic reasons.
Financially. Yeah. And so that's changing things. And so part of why, again, we kind of knock it where, you should be adult by 18, move out of your family's house, yada, yada. They simply can't afford it. And luckily, there are some families who realize that, hey, you make sure to go into school, you make sure you're doing your stuff, we're going to support you and be there. So the structure's drastically changed, but going back to marketing and going back to social media, it is actually affecting the brain, I believe, to where it is prolonging certain areas of development in the brain that people are sort of thinking like they're teenagers.
Yeah. Right.
And again, in a way that social media is rewarding, is by having the best posts, by having
right.
And so again, it goes back to like when you're 15 years old, those are some sick shoes. I remember when I was a kid, dating myself, a fresh pair of Globes. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, those are it. Oh, wow, those are amazing.
I used to stuff my shoes with socks.
I remember those too with the big tongue.
Generation.
You know what I mean? Or oh man, like you're just you come to school like you bleach your hair. Remember bleaching your hair?
Right.
Oh my gosh! Like, oh my gosh!
Cool.
You definitely had bleached hair.
I did have bleached hair. And went orange. I did it all.
Wow.
I did it all, bro. I did it all.
Subscribe to the Certain Sound Plus, and we're gonna.
We won't get
we'll
to
show
things.
pictures of Chris
so
when he was younger.
Again, he's like, I mean, like, and I don't want to be like super old school, but even look at the haircuts. So all these things are being rewarded though.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it brings another dynamic, and I think you're just nail on the head as far as the dopamine release and the dopamine addictions. But I believe social media brings that other dynamic in a sense. When you're in an adolescent phase, there's a very important aspect of when you start integrating into society, you start forming to become a healthy, functioning member of society. And if you start to do something that's weird, well, you get critiqued by your peers, right? And this is why we joke about sometimes how homeschool kids can be a little more on the awkward side, right? Because
they didn't have the community.
They won't look you in the eyes, You're like, hey, bro.
Or they'll look into your eyes too strongly.
I have a number of homeschool kids in my youth, and like I intentionally work with them. And I said, all right, you're not going to be a weird kid, okay? Like
but there is a dynamic.
You're going to talk to a girl right now.
And so for some point, that is a healthy thing, that critique.
Right.
But social media has developed a stunt in people's sense of identity because now they are overly critiqued.
Right. Yes.
Because I could handle the opinions of the people in my context, like the 20, 30 people in my class or the people in my youth group or my family members. But if I'm now going to add 1,000 Instagram followers to the voice of that critique, and their voice is mostly, their opinion is mostly voiced in their likes, right? And so now kids are seeking to find validation and a sense of identity. They might want to go a certain direction and feel passionate about that, but that thing doesn't get likes.
Right.
And that thing doesn't get interaction. Right. And so they start becoming overly critiqued and pushing into a direction that they might not even feel passionate about. Yeah. But because the opinion of 800 faceless people don't approve that direction.
Right.
People, and I surveyed my Bible college class last week.
Yeah, come on.
I said, how many of you can be honest and say recently you have not posted something you wanted to post on your Instagram
because you knew it wouldn't reach the bar of likes you're used to getting.
Wow, that's
and
good.
Almost everyone raised their hand.
So good.
And so they're overly critiqued.
There's some things that are only meant to be reinforced within a community.
Well, even
a real community.
Well, this shows how much, how behind the times we are. Instagram's actually losing momentum.
Oh, big time.
Right.
Let's not TikTok. TikTok's even faster.
Right.
Even faster. People are going viral. You know what I mean? Like, if way faster than Instagram ever was. You know what I mean? Like, Instagram is actually kind of our own generation. Now TikTok, and then who knows what's next. And there's some stuff in the wake, but it's faster. It's more just like, in a way, like even raw, more authentic. So another subject right there, as far as like actually craving more. The shift is actually funny within it. You can see there's actually more desire for authenticity than complete polishness. And so there's like this, I think, like this outcry we see within, society that's saying, hey, we're kind of like over the super polished fake stuff. We actually want some authenticity. Yeah. And so TikTok's alluring, not because of the music, but because like these aren't really highly edited videos. They're just kind of raw on the spot. Reels are getting, way more like, I mean, literally like it went like full circle, right? We used to look at early YouTube videos. It's a guy with his cheap camera by himself, Then was super high polished.
Right.
And then now it's back to where people, hey, what's up? You know what I mean? And people, that's authentic. That's authentic. That's real. You know what I mean? But still, despite the rawness or realness, what's being rewarded is by like you're looking. I mean, we have a social media with the youth group, okay? And so we post mostly for communications, send that. And I'd be lying to say, like, how well did this thing do?
Yeah.
How many likes? How many views? How many, to say that, is it all for the getting the word out part of it, but also to see if it's something that, young people are attracted to, you know what I mean? So I'm saying we've all done it, if you haven't done it good, but now that's part of the norm now.
Yeah.
How well did this do?
Let me add the counteract to this, because we can be talking about the problems all day long and not offer solutions, and that's where I have a problem too.
Yeah, that's good.
We become complainers about the situation and don't offer examples for the church to follow, for the apostolic movement to follow to fix this thing. I want to go back to this Summer of Sacrifice.
Yes,
right? That's what it's called, Summer of Sacrifice.
School
of Sacrifice. Let me testify to that work, how that works, okay? Because I remember being young, a youth, and working and doing stuff like that. There is something unique that happens to a God-fearing youth that starts sweeping the floor, okay? It happens within this community. Sisters from the church come in and see me sweeping in, okay, it's a Spanish church. We call them after talento, after we sell our food, okay, we fundraise. And I'm sweeping, and a sister comes in and says, "What a great young man, sweeping here on the floor. Oh yeah, you're such a good young man." There is something about a woman in the church referring to me and saying, "I respect that." The community has reinforced my identity.
Yeah.
And there's also something about me symbolizing that service as the kind of service that I'm going to give when I'm a husband, because I know these young girls, of course, throughout a teenager's life, they have multiple crushes, right? But amongst them, the young man knows that there's a girl in here that I like, and I'm going to work really hard, because my work is a metaphor.
I'm going to stack these
for
chairs.
the manhood. I'm going to stack these chairs. For the manhood that I am reaching for. It actually reinforces this desire. Manhood means taking responsibility and doing. Even though it makes me feel physically uncomfortable, there is reward for doing something productive. And that really reinforced my identity. I came through those years with a better sense of who I am and a more willingness to work and participate in the things that were less attractive within the church, because it was reinforced in such an early age. I heard, older men as well saying, "That's you're a strong working young man. That's good. That's very good."
Yeah.
And that helped me. If youth never have those experiences, how are they going to be formed by the community? How is the community going to come together and reinforce behaviors that they can then carry into young adulthood? Rather, they enter into young adulthood with no identity at all. And so they're trying to build something that should have been built way back then.
Well, I mean, you said it, and it's super important that the concept of prolonging adolescence is a lucrative marketing approach, mostly by the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And businesses in general. And we've talked about this, and we're all privy to the discussion that the concept of a teenager was not developed until like the 1940s.
Yeah.
Before the 1940s, the concept didn't exist.
Yeah.
And they saw it was this post-World War I generation where, you know, the men were out serving, and the men were out serving their country on the battlefield. And the women and the young teenagers, you know, 12, 13 years old, were the ones populating the workforce while the men were off at war. Yeah. Well, the men come home, and the women particularly will go back home to some degree, but the kids may continue to work, the fast food joints and the like. And so there was this marketing, this aha moment where we have these kids who are 13, 14, 15, 16, populating the workforce. They have large amounts of cash to spend with very little financial obligation. Yeah. And so they've got money and no reason to spend it because mom and dad are ultimately paying for the bills. So they started to paint this persona, and they started to do it with movies like starring James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. Yeah. This was actually developed as a ploy to create this persona.
Yeah. Graffiti.
And what do you mean?
Movie called Graffiti.
Right. Yeah. What do you mean? This is the concept. Think of it. What do you mean rebel without a cause? Yeah. Rebels always have a cause. Historically, if you're a rebel, you are rebelling against an institution, a government, or a leadership on the basis of their tyranny, or you feel like their ideals are evil, and so you rebel against them. What do you mean I'm a rebel, but I don't even have a reason to be a rebel? And so they started to paint this persona that your parents are your enemy. They're trying to steal your happiness and your autonomy. And what they're doing by telling them your parents are stealing your autonomy is that they, in fact, are pushing them away from responsibility, pushing them away from a natural progression into adulthood, and they are stealing their autonomy. Because as long as I can keep you in this persona that you're too young to do this and you're too young to do that, I could control you with my advertisements, and with all of my propaganda. And we talk about schooling. For the most part, schooling, they tell you, you don't know. It is the motif now. You don't have to know what you want to do when you first come to college. You've got plenty of time. And kids go to universities not for 4 years anymore, but they hop around from university 6, 7, 8 years. Their student debt is through the roof. And even after the 8 years, they still don't even have a degree, right?
No sense of
and
identity.
So and I guess we started the discussion earlier. The point is, as a young adult pastor, I understand that this is the narrative of the world. This is the way that they think. So I don't necessarily just stomp my feet and get mad at it and say, well, you should need to change. I try to insert myself, hopefully, into that world and let them know you're not too young. Even in the youth group, you're living that and teaching that you're not too young at 15 to be responsible. But people are coming in from the world thinking that they're too young at 25 to be responsible. Yes. And so you approach people in that vantage point, in that point of life, who have been taught, you don't need to have any sense of career, any sense of identity. In the ages of 25 to 27, you still have time. And we see this reflected in statistics. People are getting married between the ages of 31 and 35 now is like average married age now. So we have lots of these kids in church who are getting married a lot later, and there's this persona that's put upon them. Well, I was married at 21 and you're 25. And so there's an overall cultural shift. And so as a young adult pastor and in young adult ministry, we recognize that these shifts have taken place.
Right.
We don't necessarily get mad at the person or an individual because they're just a product of society, but rather we see the advantages. Okay, so no longer do parents rely on their children to help pay with the bills like they did maybe 100 years ago. What does that mean? That means I have a young person who has time, who has little responsibilities except from their schooling. That means that if I could radicalize them, if I could give them a sense of purpose and identity, that means because of their lack of financial obligations and
fiscal obligations. I can get them plugged into the work of God.
Yes.
And rather seeing something as a negative,
Right.
I could see it as a positive.
Yeah.
Because they do have that internal desire. And I see this with young adults, even on another stratosphere, because they're legal adults, even though they're still living at home. So they still have autonomy. If a young adult wanted to go on a 6-week missions trip, who's going to stop them?
Mm.
If a young adult wanted to pray all night, every night, who's going to stop them?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have necessarily so many bills that they have to pay. They're still living at home. They're still in their high school bedroom. They're taking a few classes, but the nature of college classes, it's a lot looser schedule than even high school would be.
Yeah.
It's an hour here, an hour there. Some schools, you don't even have to show up. You can just zoom in. So they have this, some young adults, they work jobs like Chick-fil-A or Amazon where there's tremendous flexibility with their schedule.
Yeah.
And I have certain young adults right now, I mean, they are the ideal minister. I mean, you call all-night prayer meeting, they're there. As far as like maybe some of the other adults in the church that are a little bit older with children responsibilities, you're like, hey man, I gotta go to work the next day, you know? And so there's this amazing group that I feel like many of our people have underutilized because we've kind of stomped our feet and gotten angry that they just haven't magically reached this point.
Yeah.
Rather than stepping in and say, all right, let's help and be that extra buffering zone.
Right.
But also not just try to fix you, but take advantage of the season of life you're in and use you and allow you to get plugged into the work of God.
Exactly.
Like you might not be able to do once you're married and have kids and things like that. So I'm telling you, man, they're a radical group. They're an on fire group.
Yeah.
Both youth and young adults.
Yep.
And young adult ministry, and we talk about this all the time, has got to be more than the bowling night once a month.
Right.
It's got to be a lot more than coffee night. And, you know, we teach a curriculum, you know, in someone's house, drinking coffee once a month and a Christmas party every year. This group, just like the youth, just like the children, is if they are treated as if you are real, genuine, important ministers of the gospel.
Yes.
And that your life and your season of life represents a season that you'll never get back, that you can give yourself to God like you've never given yourself to God before. And you start calling prayer meetings with that group. You start using that group to evangelize, teach Bible studies. I think it's the most underutilized group in the church because we spend more time complaining about what they're not rather than ushering into what they can be in this season of life.
Right. That's good. You know, what I was thinking is that it's interesting because even the world knows that there is something amiss within how people are growing up. And we can see it in the reason why people like Jordan Peterson are very popular.
Right.
The world knows. There is, it's the natural order of things pressing against the system that has been created by sin and selfishness and self-indulgence.
Right.
Natural theology is still here.
Right.
The nature of the way that God has constructed the world, it is not natural for a young man to not have direction at certain ages. Well, and the reason why I say certain ages is because if I say 25, if I say 26, 27, it's making an objective statement. But I mean more or less those 20
For someone, it could be 20, it could be 8, but it probably, in most cases, shouldn't be past your 30s.
Yeah, you know, exactly. So, but we're talking about this range, and the way that God has built our hearts, our minds, our bodies, the natural progression of our DNA, our hormones, all of this was meant to be within a certain system. And because of self-indulgence, self-centered living, it is pressing against the natural order of things, and it's causing more mental illness than ever before.
Yeah.
Anxiety, depression,
rampant,
hopelessness.
Rampant.
Man, it put a knot in my throat. I saw a speech of Jordan Peterson, and he was up there talking, and there is a young man who storms the stage, and he says, I think his name is David. I'm not sure. Well, we'll just call him David. He says, my name is David. My name is David. I just wanted to meet you. I'm not well. I am unwell. I need help. I am unwell. He literally rushes the stage, so that he can see Jordan Peterson closer. And he's shouting with this desperate cry in his voice. I'm unwell. I'm unwell. My name is David. I'm unwell. I need help. I need help. And Jordan Peterson looks towards him with more compassion than I've seen a lot of apostolic Christians.
Right.
And say, we're going to work to get you the help that you need. And he broke down, weeping and crying on stage like a child. We're talking about a young man that was probably in his 20-somethings.
Yeah.
And he was bursting out of his own mind. His stress, his anxiety got him to such a place that in a last moment of desperation, he goes up in that stage and he cries out, Jordan Peterson, I need help. I need help.
That's so powerful.
Imagine if that kind of desperation were pointed towards the gospel, to a God that could actually help him.
Yeah.
Right.
We are missing something here.
Right.
We are missing an opportunity. There is a young adult population that is desperate for help.
So important.
They're reaching for Jordan Peterson. They're reaching for Joe Rogan. They're reaching and they're saying, I need identity. I need identity. And I need it now. I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my soul. Who am I? Where am I? I'm struggling with anxiety. And now is not the time to just criticize and say, look how underdeveloped you are. Now is the time to say, it doesn't matter what your past was and what privileges that you had when you were younger, whether you had a mother, a father, whether you lived in middle class, lower class, high class. If you are desperate for identity, you can find it in God.
Right.
Yeah.
And we are missing a chance
So important.
to help them build up who they can be in the things of God.
So important. And what's the Jordan Peterson message is take responsibility.
Right.
Don't blame anybody. Be an honest person. Stand up straight. Make your bed. Clean
Yeah.
your room.
Right.
And he's become
Lessons that should have been taught young.
right.
That's the kind of stuff we tell children.
Right.
And he's telling young adults,
But
clean
but
your
but,
room.
but you, I mean, you said something. I'm going to be chewing on this for weeks. I think
Yeah.
you said something that was so profound a moment ago when you said natural theology is still at play.
Mm-hmm.
The natural order of things still is in effect, regardless of how long society wants to go counterintuitive
Yes.
to literally
growth,
divine
yeah.
nature.
Right.
And Jordan Peterson, just in one small element, says no, natural order is a thing.
Yeah.
And responsibility
Yeah.
does bring fulfillment.
Right.
And if he, with such a limited spiritual view,
Come on.
I mean, Jordan Peterson, I think I've always said, I haven't always said it, but I've said as of late that he has maximized
Yes.
the potential of general revelation.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
and we-
I would agree with
And
that.
we've seen him come to a knowledge of God through his general revelation.
Mhm.
And I've listened to some of his talks and watching his progression just through the study of the sciences alone, objective science, not manufactured science, but objective science. He has found God through that.
Mm-hmm.
Now he hasn't found, salvation in the blood,
Yeah.
and that can only be found through spiritual revelation, right? But he's maximized general revelation. And if he, through a limited spiritual scope, but just through the observable universe, has helped people find fulfillment,
Yeah.
like you said, how much more in a young adult generation, not necessarily within our church body,
Right.
but the greater community
Yes.
are longing for not just a purpose of being responsible and paying your bills, but finding that they have an indelible place in the body of Christ,
Yes.
an indelible mission, and God's got a purpose for them, even if it's not as a pastor or an evangelist or a minister. I preached a message like a year or so ago, and it was called the Apostolic Employee.
Yeah.
And I talked about, look at every job you work at, not just as a source of income,
Yeah.
but as a mission field.
Yes.
If you work at Chick-fil-A,
There's purpose there.
there's purpose there.
Mm.
If you work at Amazon, don't just think of the hourly wage that you get,
Mhm.
because there's going to be so much
Mhm.
unfulfillment in that.
Yeah.
Rather, look at, I have an opportunity to be a witness everywhere I go. I have an opportunity, because it talks about in Peter that they're going to speak evil of you because of the way you live. But there's going to be a moment where God visits them, and they're going to remember the good works that you did, and they're going to glorify God because they observed you on a daily basis
Yeah.
and what it meant to live right. And you're going to make you're going to play an integral part in someone's decision to come to God, not even because of the words you witness to them, but by the conduct you constantly lived your life in excellence into the glory of God. And people can find purpose in that.
Yeah.
And waking up and understanding, I might not teach anybody a Bible study today. I might not witness to anybody. I might not have an opportunity to witness to anybody like via tract or preach the gospel to them. But my life could be a testimony of the power of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And ultimately just my life and living my life with excellence. And we've always said it as it pertains to youth ministry, don't just preach the gospel, live the gospel. Become somebody, because I know my youth ministers, what convinced me to live for God long-term really probably wasn't any message that I heard, but it was the people who populated the youth group, the pastors of the youth group. And I looked at their life, and I looked how they lived their life, the compassion, the kindness that they showed, the work ethic that they showed, the consistency that they showed, the spirituality that they showed. And there was something in me that says, if they could do it, I want to live like them. I want to be like them. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Josh. They need people to demonstrate that you're not too young and these aren't out of your season of life to fulfill.
Right. I think we need to have apostolic versions of what, and not to use Jordan Peterson as as kind of a saint, but
you're right, because he's extremely popular. So there's something.
There's a job that he is doing that I think we can learn from, and in essence, he's giving them a playbook. I'm going to call it discipleship, right? Because it's going to help us understand and translate that into our apostolic context. You know what I mean? He is giving a book of discipleship. This is how you become a responsible human being.
12 rules of life,
12 rules of life. Now, there are limits to that development, right? They will always come to a cap. They will always come to a limit. Why? Because God, he is the creator of the universe, and the only way ultimately that any human being who is created in the image of God can achieve the maximum sense of fulfillment is in the will of God, in the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we need apostolic Jordan Petersons. You know what I mean? We need apostolic Jordan Petersons. We need to be talking like that, and we need to be giving young people tools, young adults tools, the tools that they should have gotten when they were younger. We need to give it to them. We need to give them opportunities to grow and grow in community, which brings another point as well. That dynamic that should have been experienced as a younger child and a teenager of the community saying, oh, that's a good job. That's a good job. That's great. I'm so glad you're doing that. Oh, keep on the good work. Because they're young adults, us who are leaders are less likely to encourage them in that way, because it's something that we relegate to younger people.
Right.
And so we don't encourage young adults enough when they've never had it their whole life. No one is, some of them have never been told their whole life, you're doing a good job.
Right.
I'm proud of what you're doing.
It's crazy.
You know what I mean?
It's crazy.
And they need it. We need to disciple them and give them that identity, give them a space where they can develop that identity that should have been developed long ago.
People, I mean, and then maybe this is off, maybe it's not even worth putting on the podcast, but something the Lord has had me do as of late with young adults. And you talk about the lump in your throat. God has given me a very strange compliment to give to people. And I only do it when the Spirit leads me to do it. And when I do it, I'm telling you, I've done it like 3 or 4 times. Instantly, there's like this breaking. Like people like start to weep.
Yeah.
And I'll look at them and I say, hey, I just want to say you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
And then they'll, thank you, man. And like you said, it really resonates with them. And I look at them in the eyes and I say, I just want to tell you, I'm happy that you were born.
Ooh, wow.
I'm really grateful that you were born. I'm so glad you were born.
Yeah.
And every time I say that,
and
I don't just say it to everybody, but they instantly, I have not said it to anybody yet, and I try to do it only led by the Spirit, where they just instantly start weeping, because they've never felt that their life had value.
Wow.
And it's just a simple compliment, right?
Yeah.
Like, or comment.
Yeah.
But, there's that reinforcing, because there's the two forms of identity. Who am I and what do I do? And we need to be affirmed in both.
Yes.
We need to be affirmed that I'm doing a good job. You need that. You play a part in the body. You play a part in society. And when you do well, you need to be affirmed. But also you need to be affirmed that you have value as a person, aside but from anything that you do, because Jesus died for us, regardless of
anything that we
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
simply because we were created in his image. And, you know, it's the most popular scripture of all time, but it still fares well. For God so loved the world.
Yeah.
And God looked at you and me, and he saw the value of our life, regardless of anything that we did, and came, died for us,
Yeah.
that we can have eternal life.
Oh. Very good. Now, what do we do if the leaders themselves need that value too? Right? If we ourselves need that encouragement as well. Because sometimes we need it as well, and we can't pass it down to those below us because we ourselves are discouraged and we ourselves haven't heard
Well, there's a negative,
encouragement.
there's definitely a toxic culture, and I don't know how far it reaches, but in CLC, I think we do this well, but there could be a toxic culture of, don't give them too many compliments,
Yeah.
because it's going to blow their head up.
Right.
And inadvertently, you don't say anything nice to them,
Yeah.
right? But behind closed doors, people are saying very nice things about that person.
Yeah.
But there's this underlying thing.
Yeah.
If you ever give anybody any type of affirmation,
Yeah.
oh, their head's going to blow up,
Right.
So I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah.
I think it's a negative, toxic. The Bible says give honor to whom honor is due. If their head blows up, that's between them and God.
Right.
And God will work on them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't give me a right to superimpose myself as God
That's
and
good.
assume their reaction.
Yeah.
The Bible just tells me to give honor to whom honor is due.
Yeah.
And so me. I mean, I'm always loving on people, always telling them, complimenting them, tell them how good they're doing. And if their head blows up because of that,
Yeah.
well, that the Lord will deal with them. It's not my job to keep them humble in that regard.
Who's that very well-known preacher? I just forgot I know his name. I forgot his name. Who went to Ethiopia, prayed to
Really cool.
Billy Cole. Billy Cole says this in one of his teachings, and I highly recommend this for anyone listening to the podcast. He has a bunch of sessions online on spiritual gifts and ministry and stuff like that. He has this saying that goes something like this: for every one person who walks away from God because they got too prideful for a compliment, there are 9 people who have walked away from God because they left discouraged,
So true.
not lifted up,
So
right?
true.
We do this in the name of those people that got prideful and said, well, they let it go to their head, as we say, right? And then we restrict it from a generation of people that deeply need to be reinforced in what they're doing. They need to be reinforced in their identity.
So important, man.
Yeah.
And this is why even in young adult ministry, God will lead either you or I to talk about the subject of friendship so many times as pertains to evolving your concept of friendship, not just people who you enjoy having fun with, not just people who give you the best laughs, but people who are going to fortify you spiritually
Yeah.
and you them.
Yeah.
And because if you are drifting, there is somebody to
Yeah.
call you on it, or if you do need encouragement, there's
Yeah.
somebody to call you on
Yeah.
it. But there's this sense of spiritual isolation where somebody can struggle in a church service for years and never get approached or commented on. And the people will struggle for years
Yeah.
with nobody putting their hand on their shoulder.
Wow.
I get phone calls, from people of other churches, when we're on call. And I had a call from somebody the other day. He's like, I go to an apostolic church. I'm going through the worst time in my life. My sister died. My mom died. I've been ostracized by my whole family for my apostolic faith. And I just need someone to talk to. And he said this: I just need someone to pray for me. He said, I've been going to my church for years, and every time I ask for prayer, they just, it's this little patty cake prayer,
Yeah.
and they move
Go
on.
through some motion.
I just need someone to pray for me. I need
Yeah.
someone to listen to me.
Yeah.
And they have to call another church
Right.
in another place.
Wow.
And it's imperative. It's
Yeah.
imperative that we have those connections.
Let me switch gears here. We are coming up on our Lifeline conference. And this is definitely shifting gears, but it can be related in a way. There is a specific approach that the Lifeline conference has taken here in CLC that sometimes is different than other kinds of young adult events that are geared towards young adults, whether they call them retreats, or camps. there's a specific approach that we take here. What, if at all, does your view of young adult ministry and what you expect a ministry geared towards young adults, what role does your perspective on that play in how you are preparing for this conference, whether it be who you have invited to come speak, the kinds of things that we are doing leading up to this conference? Has your view of young adults, ministering to young adults, impacted the way you're preparing for this conference? Does it make it unique from other conferences or other retreats? If so, how?
You know, and obviously this is the first time I'm engaged in the young adult conference. Pastor Micah Johnson started this. I think the conference itself started in 2015. I believe that's as far back before it was a retreat. And it started off as, I believe, just, hey, conferences are a great way to get our people connected, kind of that spiritual checkpoint or booster. You know, it's the gas station. You know, it's like, hey, let's go and get a fill up. You know, and I think that's probably how it started. But the development of the conference over the years is it really became self-sustaining. You knew it was going to be a move of God. You knew it was going to be incredible. You knew the people were going to, their lives were going to be changed. And then somewhere along the line, the influence of the Lifeline Conference evolved to so much more. Now we're doing more than getting our people on fire for God, but we're letting all the surrounding people come and be a part of and see firsthand the power of young adult ministry. And man, I just believe in it. These people are the most on fire, radical. You know, like I said, they've got cars, they've got jobs, and they use that to teach Bible studies. We have a young man in Lifeline right now. He teaches 6, 7, 8 Bible studies a week. You know, and we have that across the board. And they're using their free time to do these things, and they pray all night, and they're faithful to prayer, and they're faithful to serve. I mean, if you look at our Wednesday evening service, obviously we have people in the gymnasium, but we have, I think, if I would count, upwards of 30 to 50 young adults plugged in ministry outside of Lifeline every single week, whether it be, you know, being staff members in other ministries, whether it's singing in the main, doing sound, ushering, kids ministry, freedom ministry. All these ministries have tons of young adults. They are the group, at least at our church, that are populating most of the ministry at the church as far as the day-to-days. They're not the ones necessarily preaching, but serving. So the Young Adult Conference, I think, and I'm just trying to carry on the vision of Pastor Micah, is for people in the surrounding areas to realize, hey, if you'll get a hold of this and you'll take advantage of this wonderful season of life that these young adults are in, they will prove to be the most involved group because they don't have curfews, they don't have parents, they don't have, you know, excessive amounts of homework like maybe you do in high school, and some people do. Some people have a full load in college for sure, but I haven't found that to be the case with the majority. And so with the Lifeline Conference, I would hope the ultimate vision is that people would see, whoa, we had a visiting pastor. If I said it here, everybody would know who he is. He's very, very well recognized. And he came to CLC to do kind of a see-through. He just wanted to see the inner workings and the operations of the ministry. And he came to a young adult service on a Wednesday. And he told me, of all the things I've seen on my visit, this is what has impressed me the most. He said, this is the group that we have completely underutilized. Wow. We have relegated them to the once-a-month bowling night. And the once-a-month coffee nights. And we
the guitar kumbayas.
The guitar kumbayas and the handouts, you know, let's go through, you know, Norman Geisler's book about apologetics or, you know, or whatever. He said, I never saw this group and the potential that they really had just to have a move of God. And he said, this is the thing, I'm going back and I'm going home and I'm going to address the very first thing. And so I hope the Young Adult Conference can be that for people. Like we mentioned, you know, sometimes as a conservative movement, and I'm conservative in lifestyle and doctrine in every which way, sometimes we can be apprehensive of shifts in ministry approaches. And most of the time that is very, very warranted. But like we said, the world started picking up on the concept of a teenager in the 1940s. The United Pentecostal Church, as I remember, really didn't blow up in youth ministry into the 80s and 90s. And the 90s is when it started getting big. Even in the 2000s, your youth congresses were only had 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. Now it's 20,000, 30,000 people. And so there's taken this slow progression of time to pick up on the power of that group and that age group.
Right.
And I fear that the world has pretty much picked this up. They're radicalizing the young adults in the college institutions, right? True. Most colleges aren't anything about what they're going to learn as much as they leave indoctrinated. They don't even leave with any, for some of a majority, they're not going to leave with any sense of work experience as much as they're going to be socially indoctrinated. So since the 70s, I believe the 60s and 70s is when that shift started to take place in the college, and the far left liberals, and that's another conversation for another time, started to inhabit the college campuses. And I'm fearing that it's taking us that long of a buffer time to say, whoa, they picked up on this, the power of this group in the 60s and 70s. We're only picking up on this in the 2020s. Yeah. And I hope we can learn from previous, the slowness of previous generations to say, no, this is a powerful generation. Yeah. And so that's a roundabout way of answering your question about the Lifeline Conference. But I would hope that the impacts of the conference will impact the Bible college students, because the Bible college students themselves are going to be the ones that go to their home churches all across the world. And I hope they start on fire hyphen groups and campus ministries and the like. And so this is why we brought Brother Joe Campatella, who Pastor Chris has brought for a youth camp before. And they had such a wonderful time. And that's where I was introduced when Pastor Chris brought him over. And Pastor Chris actually let me borrow his book. So Pastor Chris is the one to thank for this, about Brother Campatella being here. Hopefully we get him on a Certain Sound podcast as well.
That'd be good.
But he gave me a book on his campus ministry. And so this is why we felt he was the right one to bring in, because we don't want just our localized unit of people to just get a spiritual fill up. We hope to change the paradigm of the movement moving forward, that this group needs more than guitar kumbayas, but they need they can handle a move of God, and they want a move of God. And Pastor Micah Johnson is the one that I believe demonstrated that here for a lot of people to see, and hopefully we're just carrying that forward and taking that vision forward as well. So that's the roundabout way of it, but I hope that it changes the paradigm of the surrounding area moving forward, that people say, no, this group's not a sideshow. This group has got a lot to offer.
Right. So let me ask you guys this. What does it take for a young adult ministry to have a genuine sovereign move of God? What does it take in that age group? Because a lot of people relegate that age group to being a little bit colder, or relegate that age group to saying, well, they got their fill as teenagers. Now we're going to guitar kumbaya, and we're just going to, talk about life. And we're just going to just have a conversation, right? And I think we miss a great opportunity in the kingdom of God when all our young adult ministries are only defined by that. That's not to say that hard conversations don't need to happen. They need to happen. It's just why we're doing this podcast, right?
Right.
But what about that apostolic move of God, of groaning in the Spirit, of moving of gifts of the Holy Ghost? What does it take for that age group to engage in that kind of move of God, and what should we be doing as leaders to help stoke that fire and stir that fire up?
So such a good question, and a one I don't know if I've fully created the textbook answer, but my first, belief in what I've tried to do at Lifeline is, first of all, you have to have a paradigm shift. It's for them. They want it. They're hungry for it. They're hungry for a move of God. It's not impossible. It's going to happen if you allow it to happen. Yeah. Having a sense of community is very important as well. A sense of security, because anytime you're moving in the Spirit, if people are uncomfortable with the people who are sitting around them, it's extremely difficult to flow in the Spirit. Yeah. There has to be a sense of community around us. We have a wonderful buffer here at Christian Life Center, is that we have this wonderful Bible college who comes in and is just automatically sold out, radical, on fire for God. And so that environment is really preset for us. But where our work will begin is in the summertime when the college students leave. And historically, it was very difficult to get a crowd of young adults from Christian Life Center.
Yeah, because there's such a stark drop off when all the Bible college students leave. It's this sense of emptiness, or not as good, or
and it's very important because that that can naturally take place. And so that's why we developed the prayer retreat. And the prayer retreat is just an incredible move of God, sovereign move of God. There's something powerful about a retreat, just getting out of your comfort zone, pushing away the pressures of life, bringing in an on-fire speaker, and as a staff, pray and fast and really sow the seeds into the ground. You get the group up there, you build a sense of community, a sense of group identity, and they get an experience with God, and they come back down, and there's an incredible momentum. And so if anybody's listening, I would feel the first step is just believe that this group needs this.
Yeah.
It's always been the answer for every group in all times, whether it's children, youth, adult ministry, elders ministry. The answer is always a move of God.
Yes.
And it's no different for the young adult age. I know, that they're struggling with intellectual battles because they're going to college, and we feel like the right answer. And there definitely is room for this. The teaching on this is important. I think we should equip people. And this is where, Brother Abrego, we've tried to build a ministry for students who are populating the secular campuses so we can be that support for them. Yeah. We need to absolutely have these answers of apologetics down and how to answer these social justice questions and of the like. And the problem is they're constantly evolving. There's a new question to answer every single day. But aside from that, that will never replace a sovereign move of God.
Yes.
And so I try to live that personally. That's, me, Josh, I mean, I'm going to have a move of God if nobody else is.
Yeah.
And so first I try to emulate it. I try to demonstrate it. And then after that, I try to propagate it, whether it's through the sermons or through teachings or things of that nature.
Yeah, very good. What about you, Chris? Give us some gold nuggets here.
I think creating a move of God with young adults, it really is no different how it would be for youth or even, adults. And basically, we talk about, apostolic, let's talk about, gifts of the Spirit and prophecy, and how do you keep that going, when they're young adults, because that's all, it's pushed so heavily and so aggressively, in youth. How do we begin to do that with young adults? It's the same way, you just push it, you speak it, you believe it, you demonstrate it, Back years ago, me and my wife had come back from living in the East Coast when Pastor Micah Johnson was still young adult pastor. So we come back from the East Coast for like serving at church for a little bit after college. Got married, hit the road, served at the church for a while. We came back and we came right to the young adult ministry. I kind of got duped in a way, actually. I wasn't. They say, hey, come, let's talk, maybe consider it. And then that Wednesday, I was supposed to show up to talk to, Brother Johnson about it. He said, well, hey, would you mind preaching? Because I have to go and preach in the main sanctuary. So my introduction to young adult ministry was, hey, I'm here, So anyway, but I began to notice something very interesting about the dynamics here. Was that we're blessed to have an incredible college. Yeah. And, and I came from the college, you came from the college, nothing wrong to say about the college. The problem was that there's only move of God when the college is here. And I thought that was complete garbage. Right. I said, this is garbage. This is garbage. And so I remember that first summer, and it was all said, oh, and the college is gone. Yeah. And like I said, I think that's complete garbage. We can have a move of God. So I began to, it's not a new term that I originally started, but I began to implement the term homegrown. I've used it as a point of pride for those who, a little bit of nationalism, right? Dude, this is, and the truth is, I came at it very aggressively. We're going to have move of God. Right. We're not, it's not contingent on these other people that are here, because the Spirit of God that is here when these college students that are the cream of the crop of their churches, or this is what they're going to school for.
Yeah.
Just because they're removed, does mean that all of a sudden, like, we don't move with God, right? Yeah. How does that play into maybe someone who's out there right now? Well, you may look at a church like Christian Life Center. You may look at a larger ministry, like, well, I don't have that there. The Spirit of God is the same place anywhere.
Yeah.
What you preach and teach and what you emulate, you will then get.
Yeah.
What you plant, what you you'll get.
So good.
So, but it was, I would say, a battle in the beginning to really not to stir the spirit, but the change of mindset.
Right.
The change of mindset of not just, number one, because of the college students, but yes, you're an adult.
Yeah.
And your on fire days are not over just because you're 19 now.
Yeah.
Just because you're 20 now.
Absolutely.
Just because, you can still, that call is not fulfilled yet. You know what I mean? Like, and so to kind of answer the question, my approach of, I believe, and what I've seen, I've practiced of having a move of God with young adults, you just preach Jesus, you preach faith, you keep pushing it, just if, as we say, if they're in youth. Yeah. And, what I saw in my experience was lingering in the Spirit.
Yeah.
I saw intercession, I saw abiding, I saw groaning, because that was being taught and led. So, again, talking about, the typical, or what we're trying to break away from, young adult ministry of kumbaya and coffee meetings, I love myself some coffee, but to where, like, okay, well, now we're all refined, we're a little bit older, like, we could chill.
Right.
No, you're still radical, you're still aggressive,
and you're still in a fight of your life.
You're still if anything, it's more of a fight because, the youth ministry, you're in these bumper zones.
Mm-hmm.
You have tons of leaders, you have tons of accountability. I mean, like, you're still young enough where they're dropping you off, you have no choice.
Yeah. You're
very protected. Now you have a choice, and people buy in, but it's very set. When they graduate, now they begin to decide, now they begin to make decisions for themselves. And so we kind of see, if anything, the success of youth ministry, I hope, in their young adult ministry, but that hasn't changed. Yeah. And so when I see a kid who's like praying all these people through and breaking through in their senior year of youth camp, and then I see them 3 months later in a young adult service and they're sitting there like a bump in a log.
Yeah.
No way.
It has nothing to do with God. Yeah. Nothing to do with what's preaching taught behind the pulpit. Yeah. It's the individual needs to realize, like, dude, like,
it's a mindset.
It's a mindset,
And so, like, I think that the crux of, I think both of our answers is the move of God is a move of God everywhere.
Yeah.
But for some reason, whether it's our culture as a church, if we're being honest, or it's the world, maybe a mixture of both, there needs to be a rejuvenation of mindset.
Yeah.
That just because you've hit a certain age benchmark. And I the same dynamic happens, I'm also the young marrieds pastor. I think we've kind of shifted that, and Brother Johnson really, I don't take credit for it, has really shifted that mindset. All I've done is just carry that mindset on, because that's all I believe. I didn't feel like I had to change that mindset here. That was done before I got here. But I just hope to carry that forward. But we see that in the young married side a lot more, is once you get married and start having children, there's no need for all-night prayer meetings. And why not? Why the heck not?
Why not?
All of us in the room, we're all old married guys, and yet we all can go after it in the Spirit. What is this for some reason when you get a job and have kids, you can't be radical. You just have to have maintenance prayer to make sure you're saved, Yeah. And that's definitely not the case across the board, but it is a mindset.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So if we push it past the young adults, it goes into the young marrieds. And hey, if we push it past the young marrieds, it's going to go into the home builders,
Well, it's interesting. So, like, this past Friday, and I don't know when this is going to be, like, released or whatever, or in the archives.
Very soon.
But we had over here in the Western District, we have something called Maximum Velocity that happens, once a year. And people that are there are youth and young adults. Like, you see it, and you talk about, like, the mindset. Well, there's young adults that are worshiping and getting radical and praying through, and, like, it doesn't change. Let's look back at old school camp meetings, even camp meetings now.
Yeah.
Dude, everybody, the kids, everybody, but something kind of happened where, where we thought, like, okay, well, that, like, we kind of all that dies down when you're, like you said, I'm becoming an adult and I got the family, but these certain time periods I can really let loose.
Yeah.
And that's not a lifestyle. That's more of like an event. That's more like an occasion, you know?
Right.
And one thing, as we're talking about here, we talk about, what's the solution to all this is that you need to remain on fire. That fire you had as a youth, you can keep it going as an adult.
You can.
As a young adult. That fire you had as a single young adult, serving with all your might, with all your time, with all your money, with all your availability. Great. Now you have a family, you still serve with all your might.
Right.
Yeah.
You know? And you know what you do when you have kids? You bring your kids along.
Yep.
You bring your kids right. You bring your kids right along to where they're just in the heat of it, and but you know who's done that for years is pastors and ministers.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, kids that grow up, and I was raised like as a PK, or I was raised in the ministry, but I've seen it to where kids are rising up. You know, we a few years ago, Brother Brown came to do a young adult conference.
Remember that?
He brought his little boy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his little boy.
Brother Capitel is bringing his son.
The Capitels, when they came to for our camp, he brought the whole family, brought the whole clan. Even grandma came. You know what I mean? So everybody came. So cool. But so we see it like, so Brother Mark Brown is here. And you know, his little boy is doing an altar call. He's on his face praying.
Yeah, he was. I remember.
And I've seen other ministers that are, and that's a whole other conversation. But I've seen a shift to where these men and women of God are bringing their children. It's becoming more like, it's not like, okay, dad's in the ministry, mom's in the ministry.
Right.
Like, you coming here with us.
Yes,
You know, our buddy, our good friend, Brother Jesse Cornejo, he was telling me a couple weeks ago at a conference, he said, I bring my little boy with me now.
Yeah.
He brings his little boy, just him and his little boy.
Awesome.
I think his boy is not even 6 yet. I mean, like 5.
He's younger than Heidi. He's like 3 or 4.
He's young, but enough to where he's going to be okay. And he brings his boy with them, you know, and he's there with it. You know what I mean? You know, I know Brother Morgan and his kids are in the mix. You know, I have 2 kids of my own. You know what I mean? So you just bring them along.
Yeah,
always.
To where, you know, family prayer is what we do.
Yeah.
You know, I never forget Sister Joy Haney talks about her upbringing once her family got saved at McDonald's. Once her family, they had family prayer meetings. They learned how to pray in the family prayer meetings.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, I don't have to go on about, you know, her great legacy, you know, and the McDonald family, you know, and the work in Eureka, and just they learn how to pray in the home. And so you don't have to change your spiritual hunger or fervency. Does not need to be compromised throughout your entire life. You know what I mean? But it goes back to, we're talking about your mindset and perspective. I can still live this life. I can still be used of God. I still could be called of God. I believe right now, I feel the Holy Ghost. I feel right now there's maybe some young families that are listening to this. Maybe you're a husband, maybe you're a mother, and you know that you and your husband have a call of God in your life, and you're in your 30s. God can still call you right now to go pastor a church, even with your 3 kids.
I hear it.
I believe that.
He can pick you out of your church right now. You're serving faithfully. You're serving consistently.
And give you a call.
And I tell you right now that God is going to pluck you out. I feel this. I feel a spirit of prophecy here
right now. They're
that God can pluck you out.
Come on.
But your mindset needs to change and acknowledge that I am still called, I am still chosen. And I tell you right now, your pastor is going to agree with you. He's going to support you. And you thought you're just working the 9 to 5 and maintaining and being a good saint, paying your tithes. But what you're going to do, God's going to transport you to fulfill your call onto that field, whether it's North American missions, whether it's foreign missions. You still have a call in your life with your 3 kids and your wife. And your mortgage. He's going to take care of it.
Take your kids with you, man.
You take them with you.
I think we cripple the faith of our children when we use them as an excuse to not follow the call of God. We cripple the faith of our children. Well, I can't show up to church on time because of my kids, and as if kids are a fundamental hindrance to following the call of God.
Hey, you got a reason to say it. How many kids you have, brother?
I got 4, bro.
Come on, you got a reason.
I got 4, man.
You're not talking
at there, man.
And
And people will see. I'll take all 3 of my kids to the altar.
That's powerful.
Or my wife
one of the most powerful things I see.
While my wife is nursing the newborn, you know, and you know, people laugh because I'll have one kid in one hand and the other 2 have to share one hand, you know. And so
I love it.
There's 2 kids in another hand.
That's
and
so
around.
powerful.
I want my kids' earliest memory.
Yes.
And I tell the young, because I'm the young married pastor, and I tell them, like, do you want the earliest memories that your kids have?
So good.
of you skipping church and watching online in your PJs because it was too hard to take them because they were too much of an inconvenience to make it to the house of God. Do you want that to be their earliest memories? Because, when they're 5 and 6, it's easier.
Well, my kids were born during COVID, so please forgive me, my children.
Right.
It wasn't
besides the COVID babies.
It wasn't because I.
my son Theo didn't get dedicated till he's 2.5. You know,
dude, that was same thing. My kids. Dude,
so,
like,
but I want my kids' earliest memories is to be with me in the altar, and I'm so grateful that my 7-year-old just got the Holy Ghost like a month ago.
And that's powerful.
And she's interceding and she's praying.
I love it.
Just the other day, my wife, they had a chapel on Wednesday, and chapel ends at 3:00, and my wife goes to her normal spot, and my daughter's not there. And my wife's like, "Where is she?" And she asked her teacher. She said she's still interceding in the chapel.
Wow.
And my wife had to go pick her up, and she's travailing and interceding with a group of kids. She's in 2nd grade, and interceding and travailing. And I want that to be said, that my kids early, and I'm by far from a perfect father, but my kids have not inhibited me in being a more spiritual person. They have propelled me to be a more spiritual person. Because if anything, I've got to be more. I can't loosen my spiritual standards because of them. I have to fortify my spiritual standards because of them.
That's good.
And so, and that's a burden. It's another podcast for another day, right? The young marrieds. So many people take that break when they get married and have children from ministry. And the problem is they never unbreak. They never unbreak.
That's why we cultivating.
We've had a couple, few people in the youth that they've started families, and I let them take a break, but we have a restart date. Like, okay, take the time off, but on this date we're gonna either get you plugged in or have that discussion about what's next for you. You know, and if you don't have the energy, the strength, or time to be in this ministry capacity, then let's make sure you're plugged in somewhere to serve,
Super
and, and because things, here's the thing out there, young marrieds or young adults, is that you will find seasons where it's going to be difficult to give as much to the ministry. Like, I have someone in my ministry right now, they're working a graveyard shift and they're going to school as well. They're crazy. But he said, Pastor Chris, I could be there Wednesday nights. I said, I'll take that Wednesday night. But as soon as your schedule opens up, realistically, not demanding, then, because they have a call on their life, I said, we want to get you plugged in. You know what I mean? So I think as a leader, you have people in your ministry that are going through different seasons, always have a plan to get them back in, not forcefully, not demandingly, but again, let them know you're valid. We love you. We understand the season. We'll get you through this season. Things are changing, like with you, but don't forget about them, because they will find something else to replace that time. And so, but again, that's another discussion, talking about, being married, a young family. I think a young family, and trying to strive to implement ministry habits and ministry, focus into your family. Maybe you are working a regular job, you know what I mean, which more star. How do I do that? I said, well, I think there's really practical ways. Number one is that you and your wife got to be on the same page, but again, that's another discussion. Good, I can't deal without my wife. My wife, Angela, she's mama. She holds it down. She's the one most of the time. I'm at the church. I have to go a little bit early. She's the one that gets the kids ready. Gets them dressed, get the snacks, loads them up, and I mean, she's, and I know, your kids are still in car seats as well. You know what I mean? To get in there, I don't care if you got the minivan. Get in there, pull this kid out. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of work. You
got twin Villanuevas.
I got twin Villanuevas. So, but again, like it's a lot of work for our wives. To keep it going. But again, like, they see the vision, they want it too for their children, for their sons or their daughter. I have boys, but Morgan's got 2 boys, 2 girls. You got perfect. Hopefully we get a girl here.
The full set.
The full set. So, cool. But again, like, you can live for God to the fullest degree your entire life, if you intend to do so. And for leaders out there, you have to believe and know that your people can live for God at a high tier.
Cultivate it
at a high tier.
You can do it.
Like, respect. That they, have jobs and they have to get up in the morning, but don't do them the disservice by not asking them, hey, can you be here for all night prayer? Can you be here for this? Because they may surprise you, and